If your idea of an exit plan from your business is something that's strictly in your head that you've thought about, but it's not in writing, or if your plan is, I'll sell it when I'm done, listen up because we've got an expert that's got some surprising facts for you. Hi, Len. So I've got Len Bruskiewitz with me from Greater Heights Coaching, and he is a certified exit planning
Advisor.
associate advisor. Thank
Advisor.
you. CEPA. I got that part. Okay.
Yep.
And so, Len, what do you think? Should people have just a plan in their head?
Well, first off, John, thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to share some hopefully helpful hints with your listeners. No, you should not just have that plan in your head, and there are a number of reasons why. For one, people's memories aren't so good, but secondly, if God forbid something happens to you, nobody else knows what that plan is, and that can cause real problems. But the if you're one of those who just has the either no plan or just the plan in your head, you're in the majority. About 60% of business owners don't have a written transition or exit plan. And so hopefully by the time we're done today, everybody will at least start thinking about the things they need to be working on, regardless of what stage your business is at. So this is really something I see exit planning as equaling business planning, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, especially if you want the business to either provide a retirement income for you when you're no longer working in it, in whatever form that is. Yeah, that's like providing the longevity or the transferability of the business, right?
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk about some of the options, but regardless of how you intend to exit your business, you kind of need this plan, whether that's, you know, passing it to a family member, selling it, or whatever. Having that written down and working towards it is a really important way. One stat I want to share up front that I think is really interesting and sobering is that most small business owners have about 80% of their financial assets tied up in their business. And that's a lot. So, in order for them to kind of harvest those, they have to do a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about. And the risk is that, uh, you know, your business is not like a stock on the NASDAQ. You can't necessarily turn it into cash anytime quick. So you do have to do a little bit more planning and a little bit more getting ready in order to harvest the financial asset you've built up over years.
Yes, and you've mentioned twice now the exit planning and transition, and I think the way I'm hearing it, because we're very focused on family businesses, transition is usually to the next generation, not always, but that's sort of a for the older generation, that's still a form of exit, right? And like I've got a cousin, his father started a business, and then he worked in the business for his whole career, and then his father sold it to him so that his father would have a retirement income and he would take over the business. So that's one way, one strategy. But there is that tension, that fear, I want to call it, in the older generation of, how do I take care of my kids and leave them this business that I've built and still protect myself and my retirement income?
Yeah, valid concern, and look, succession or transition to a family member is certainly one way that you can pass a business along. There are others, right? You could sell it to a third party. You could sell it to management or to employees. You could shut it down. I mean, they're all different options. One of the things that I think is interesting and talks to your point is that 50% of business owners today think that they're going to pass the business along to their kids, right? To the younger generation. In reality, it only happens about 25% of the time. So there's a big gap there between intent and what really happens. And a big piece of that is really, the part of what you deal with, which is the communication between those generations. What can happen is the older generation says, "Oh, of course, my kids are going to be interested in this business. And the kids may look up and say, you know what? I've seen mom and dad working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, not taking a vacation. I'm not interested, right? So, but they're afraid to say that, right? So that communication is a huge piece, and I don't want to talk about a million options here, but in your example, where the older generation wants uh, wants their kids to take it over, and they really want it, a little bit for legacy, but also to get some value out of it. That may not be the best option. The younger generation may not be interested, may not have the skill set. So in that case, it may just be a better solution to sell the business and then, you know, get the money up front and be able to spend it the way they want. They can give it to the kids if they want. They can keep it. But now, rather than putting a business on a path, maybe that it's not going to survive. Again, kids not interested, kids not skilled. There are other ways to preserve, generational wealth other than continuing to run a business.
And isn't there an argument for building the business along the way so that you preserve that option, so that, because none of us knows what's going to happen. A 20-year-old entering the family business might really, really want to take it on and make that their life, and then something happens later on that now things have changed. So I read a really nice little book. I think we chatted about it earlier. It's called Built to Sell, and it's kind of a story form about creating the business using I want to think of it as franchise principles, where you make a business that will run without the owner there, and make it for most. I think, and this is I guess I should turn this into a question. So, does setting up a business so that the owner is not required, does that make it more sellable?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, in my work, when I'm working with business owners, I want them to know what their potential options are, whether they want to sell it, pass it along to a family member. But in reality, it really doesn't matter, because what they should be doing is preparing their business so that anyone can run it, and building in that flexibility so that they are not required. So really where this comes down to is when a business goes up for sale, and I'll talk about it as it's being purchased by a third party in this case. If a potential buyer doesn't see a way for them to come in and run the business once the owner is gone, there is zero value in that business, right? So if the business requires the owner to be there 20 hours a day, it's worth nothing, unfortunately. So you have to get your business ready and train people, document your processes, all those kinds of things, so that someone else can come in and run it. So again, that could be your child, could be the younger generation, but it could also be a third party. And getting your business ready for that flexibility is absolutely crucial, regardless of the outcome.
And even if you don't want to sell it, having it set up that way gives you a lifestyle choice. You haven't made a job for yourself then. You have an investment that you can manage.
I completely agree. And when I work with business owners, I want them, many of them come and say, I want to sell the business in 3 or 5 or 7 years or whatever. And when you implement some of these things, as you talked about, where you simplify and you focus, 3 years comes and they say, you know what? I'm having more free time than I've ever had. I'm making more money than I've ever had. I think I'm just going to keep doing this for a little while. That's a win for me, right? Like, I don't exist to have a company sold. That's not how I get that's not how I value my services. It's really to get the owners in the best possible place. So that's a win in my perspective. It becomes more fun to run and less work. That's a win-win.
Yeah, that's a total win. And hey, if the next generation sees that, as opposed to what you described, just not being able to take a day off, maybe that they're much more interested in it too. That
Exactly.
can also, if there is a next generation.
It's more attractive
So
to everyone.
do you, where's your starting point? Like when you start talking to a business owner, what's the first question they ask you?
Well, a lot of times they ask me, is this going to be really complicated? And because that's a big reason why they don't start. They think it's going to be really hard. And the answer is it doesn't have to be, right? So you can start like any project, you can start with small steps. Um, and so that's one of the first things I say is, we can do this at your pace. The important thing is to get started. And one of the first things that I recommend a business owner do is get a professional business valuation done to say, what is your business worth today? So that's really what I encourage because it just sets a nice starting point. So now you can say, okay, it's worth this today. And I'll be honest with you, John, most of the time when that business valuation comes back, it's not as high as the business owner was hoping for, right? So there's a gap between where that's worth today and what their perception is. And so that's what we work on is figuring out the ways to increase that value. Um, so that's a lot of what my work is. And how does that happen? It comes to focusing on the right things, understanding what your metrics are, kind of doubling down on the things you're really good at, getting rid of the things you're not so good at, um, and also focusing on the things that potential buyers care about, right? So potential buyers really love recurring revenue, for example. So if there are ways to take your business from a kind of one-off to something that's recurring, that's going to increase the value. That's just one example. It's also getting rid of, if you have customers that are a pain and you're losing money on, like tell them, sorry, we're not a good fit anymore. So those are the kinds of things that really end up increasing the value of a company.
That point about what potential buyers are looking for, that really just set off my marketing alarm there, because that's the essence of marketing, is right. We got to put ourselves in our customers' shoes, and what does the customer want? What problems does the customer have that we're trying to solve for them? That's how our business is built. It's not what we like or what we want, and so this is just kind of an extension of that. It sounds like.
Absolutely. So I go through a list of about 40 things that
Cool.
40 parts of a business. I know it sounds a little daunting. It's over
That
time.
sounds complicated.
Yeah, no, we don't do them all at once. Uh, but there are about 40 things that we've identified that either add or detract from the value of a company. And some of them are really simple, some of them are more complicated. But I gave you one. Is revenue recurring or not? What's your concentration within your customers? Do you get all of your revenue from only a few customers, or is it spread out over a number? Do you have a brand that's recognizable? Do you have a service that nobody else offers? So those are some of those 40 things, right? Um, and each of those kind of adds or detracts from the value. And again, most business owners, I'm not going to say all, but most business owners are kind of focused on internally, like what they need to pay college tuition and pay their mortgage and things like that. And they don't necessarily think about what a potential buyer cares about. So that's what I just help raise awareness around is there are a lot of things that potential buyers care about, and some are easy to fix and some take some time.
Okay. Well, I see another area where we kind of overlap is that, we say we bring fresh eyes. We bring what we bring that's of great value is our ignorance about their business. They know so much. It's you're they're too close to it. If you're always looking at something like this, you just don't have the big picture, of a little distance. And when you can bring that and you can show them what it looks like from a different perspective, there's huge value there. That old saying about, you can't read the label from inside the bottle. It is impossible for them to not have their point of view. They can expand it or, hear somebody else's, but they need to hear it.
I agree, and that is a lot. That's a lot of what uh, quantifies that gap. I think I've run this business for 20 years. It's a great business. Unfortunately, nobody really cares about how much sweat equity you've put in. They look at How much is this business growing? How much is it generating in profits? You know, all these other things. What can I do when I take over this business? That's what they care about. Uh, so you're right, that insular idea is great when you're trying to just build the thing. But as you think about somebody else taking it over, there are just different things to focus on.
What about different kinds of businesses? Like, I mean, what comes to my mind is some businesses have a big investment in property or machinery, like a manufacturing might. They've got a big physical plant, and other businesses are service businesses that may have very little actual physical assets. It's mostly in the people that are doing the work and what's in their head, their knowledge base. How does that fit into the planning and the valuation?
It matters a lot, right? So if I talk about the heavy capital plant, what a buyer is going to care about is how old is that equipment? How often does it break down? When am I going to have to buy new, right? So it's really more of a what is this going to cost me to maintain? On the service or technology base, it's how defensible is this? Are the people that have this specific knowledge, are they going to stick around, right? Is everything documented so that somebody else that I can come in and run it, right? So there are different concerns, and they impact valuation. If you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about how values are generated for a company, and it may surprise some folks who are listening. So if you think about what drives the business value for, and this is again from somebody from the outside, about 20% of the value is generated from what we call attractiveness, or what you can see from the outside. So how fast is the industry growing? Do you have a decent reputation in the market? Those kinds of things that you can see without being on the inside. Only 20% of the value is ascribed to that. Fully 80% is ascribed to what we call the four C's. So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The four C's are different kinds of capital. Think about this as goodwill sometimes. So not things you can necessarily see. So we talk about structural capital, customer capital, social capital, and human capital. So I'm going to run through each one real quick. Structural capital is, are your processes documented? So can somebody else come in and run this business and get going right away? You know, does the owner understand what really drives the business? So what are the metrics that really matter to this business? Those are things, as structural capital. The customer capital, I've talked about this a fair bit. This is, are your customers recurring or one-off? Is there too much concentration so that if one customer left, that would have a huge impact on your business? That's going to negatively impact. Um, are your customers happy, right? Are they satisfied with your service? So that's kind of the customer capital. The social capital talks to, and this is more typically on the technology or services businesses, is there a strong culture within the company? And then is the owner independent from the business? Can the business run without the owner being there? Huge generator or detractor of value. And then finally is the human capital. So how strong is the team, right? Do they have a special skill set that's hard to replace? And again, gets back to that culture thing as well. Like, are they happy, right? Are the employees dedicated? Do they believe in the mission, right? So that those things all together generate typically about 80% of the total value, and it's not something you can see from the outside. So that's something that companies understand once they kind of get inside and look around.
Wow, that sounds like it would be very challenging to measure some of those things, like the human capital there, and how happy are the employees, and how likely are they to stick around with a new owner. How do you measure that?
So there are a couple ways. One is, you can get a pretty good sense just by talking to some of the key employees whether they're happy or not. Companies will use, employee surveys as a way to gauge that. Um, but it's also pretty easy as you look at job descriptions to see what kind of skill sets people have. All those things kind of add up. It's I agree with you. It's hard to put a specific number on some of these, but you can get a pretty good sense of whether the employees are motivated or not by talking to them, watching them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can get a sense pretty quickly.
Is turnover a pretty big measure in that regard?
It is, but again, it depends on the industry, right? If you're talking something that takes, a high level of skill, if you see turnover there, that's kind of a big flag, a big red flag. If you're, running a restaurant that's seasonal, and you just know that high turnover is going to be a pretty common. So it's industry specific, but yeah, turnover is definitely an indicator.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that you mentioned, several options. What are run through the options again about, what different kinds of exits options do you give people?
Sure. So I think the first one that I talk about is a succession. Typically a family succession where older generation passes the business on to the younger generation. That's obviously a really viable option. There are some tweaks to that. You can have a succession plan, but you can also bring in maybe a minority investor who might want, who might bring some capital to the company, which would allow the owners to cash out. Typically, when it's passing along to a family member, they don't normally have a whole chunk of cash to pay out to the elder generation. So that's one option is you can bring in an outside investor. So succession, that could be kids, that could be relatives, it doesn't have to be. So that's clearly one option, right? And I'll just talk a couple of the pros and cons. Pros are, you're maintaining your legacy. It's pretty likely that the older generation can stay involved, right? Those are some of the pros. Some of the cons are, again, it's tougher for the older generation to cash out because typically the younger doesn't have a pool of resources. So the next one is a big category, and it would be selling to a third party. Now, there are a few different kinds of third parties that can purchase. Um, One is what's called a financial buyer. A financial buyer is somebody who really just wants to run the business because they think it's an interesting business that maybe they can make some money at, but it's not a piece of a bigger thing, right? So they're effectively coming in and they're going to run the business as is with their own changes. The pros are, you know, normally they're going to have some funding that's going to be able to cash out. Since you're dealing typically with a kind of a similar sized entity, they probably are going to, support your existing customers and employees, especially in the same way you would, because you can kind of handpick them. The downside is they're not willing to pay as much as a different kind of buyer. I'm going to talk about them, a strategic buyer. So a strategic buyer can be a competitor, it could be a partner, it could be a private equity firm, could be somebody in a similar industry. And the reason they're buying is because they see the business as something that can be, you know, to the power of two, not just one plus one, right? They see either your customers as being able to sell their products to your customers or your products to their customers. So they see some synergy. And the pros of these are that they're typically willing to pay the highest price for a company because again they see that there's multiples here. The cons are you typically lose a lot of the ability to have a say in the matter anymore, right? They're coming in, they're going to do things their way. They're probably not going to be as willing to keep your employees and those kinds of things. So there are pros and cons to that. And then there's a related version which you could actually sell to your employees or your management staff. Kind of an ESOP and a stock ownership plan for employees. That's a it has that looks a little bit more almost like a succession plan, right? Typically, they're not funding it. You're doing it as a retirement plan. You get the maintain the legacy, but there are some cons as well. Typically, when employees become owners and they leave, you've got to, as the original owner, you've got to cash them out. So that may cause some real cash flow issues, right? But you've got legacy, you've got people who are probably going to be really motivated to stick around, right? And then the final one, which again can make sense, is just shutting it down, right? And back to your point of if you've got a capital intensive or a real estate intensive business, that may not be a bad option. You may be able to sell the land and the building for a very tidy sum and just be done, right? Or you could sell your equipment to somebody else who could use it as opposed to the business itself. So those are the main options that most businesses. I'm going to stay away from, IPOs. I'm guessing most of the people who are listening here are probably not going to go public. I hope they would, but probably not as relevant for your audience.
I can relate to so much of that. Early in my career, we were our major part of our business, that I'll call it the retail part of our business. We were in the general agriculture industry. We had an egg farm, and we had grown it to a size that was kind of in between. We didn't have the economy of scale, and we were too big to be small. And the egg industry was just not a place we wanted to be. We were looking at the options of sell it or shut it down, and on a time limit. And we got lucky, and somebody who was sort of a competitor had previously been, we'd been connected with, wanted to buy it, and so we were able to sell it. And that was a dicey moment, and it was very capital intensive. There was land, there was building equipment, the chicken houses, all that stuff. Some of that, would have been of no value to somebody outside that business. The land, maybe, but that I've been there, done that.
Yeah, and congratulations, right? I mean, my guess is that you had set it up so that it was saleable. You had gotten it in a position where somebody was willing to buy it, which is a great
We
solution.
did. We had the egg grading machinery was, I think, maybe the only one in the United States that was from world leader in the Netherlands that made that machinery. And so we were able to produce a higher quality retail product than most of the competitors, and I think that was part of the what made it attractive.
Yeah,
But
just some
go ahead.
sobering stats just to clarify. The data says that of businesses that go up for sale, only about 25% of them actually sell, which is
Whoa.
kind of daunting, right? So, and you might say, Len, why? Why is that?
Yeah.
So I can give you a handful of reasons. I'll run through them quickly. One is that the business is just not attractive, right? It's really not a business. It's really an owner's job, and there's no value other than what the owner knows, right? So that's one big reason. The second is just a misalignment on the value. I talked about that gap. If the owner thinks it's here, but it's really here, sometimes that gap just can't be closed. Okay. The next big reason is just poor accounting, poor record keeping. That just puts a huge damper on deals. And part of why I say it takes a few years typically to get your business ready, especially if you have some accounting issues, right? Next reason is owner dependency. I've touched on this one. The business can't run without the owner. It's worth nearly nothing. And the final one is just around, in addition to bookkeeping, if somebody else can't come in and take that business over, if there's no processes documented, that is a big reason why businesses don't sell.
Wow, that's a big number. It's a
It is
big
a big
gap.
number. It is a big gap. Yeah.
75% gap. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that gets back to just having that plan in our head instead of making a plan that we can work towards. So today, if I'm in a business and I've got a long horizon out in front of me, I'm nowhere near thinking about selling. So I really don't think it's all that important for me to be planning. What should I be thinking about?
I would say you should always be thinking about it. But here are four areas that, regardless of the stage of your business, you should be thinking about and working toward. Okay. Four big categories. The first one is personal. So even if you're far away, this again gets back to business planning. You should figure out where you want your company to end up. Like, what do you want the end game to be? Right? You should have that plan even on day one of starting a business, because then you can work your way back. and figure out what do I need to do to get there. So that plan may be, I want to sell this business for $10 million. Okay, great. Now you've got a plan. Now you work your way back. Okay, so that's the first one is figure out where you want to end up. This is more important if you're getting closer is what do you want to do next? So what is your next great adventure? That may be retirement, but it may not be. It may be, you know what? I want to sell this business and then I want to start a nonprofit or I want to, do something else. But having that plan is really important, especially as, again, as you get closer, a buyer is going to ask you, what are you going to do next? And if you say, I'm going to play golf and I'm going to travel, not a good answer, right? That is not a plan because you can only play so much golf. You can only travel so
Ex-
much.
Right.
So knowing what your next great adventure is an important part. And the third thing is discuss the plans with your family. So tell them what you are thinking. We talked about this earlier, right? Don't let that be a secret. And then finally is as you're start to think about the people you're going to need to help you, right? So selfishly a business coach, but you also need a great accountant, a great business lawyer, a great estate planner, financial planner, right? You might need a life coach to help you out with what's next. Start to build that team. You're not going to need them all, maybe all right from day one, but you may find that the bookkeeper that's been great for you today isn't the best solution for you going forward when you really need advice on how to structure a sale so that it's tax advantaged for you, right? So you may need some different team members. So that's the personal side. That's kind of getting your own house in order. The next big category is business strategy. So this is about, talked about it earlier, focus on what you do best, get rid of the rest of the stuff, minimize the risks to your earnings. So the way a company is valued is basically a multiple of earnings factored back based on risk. How likely is it that those earnings are not going to happen? So what are risks? Having too much customer concentration, having pending lawsuits. Those are all risks, right? So you want to minimize those risks. And then you want to figure out how to grow. So I know it may sound backwards when I'm saying get rid of the bad customers. Get rid of the bad customers, but find good new ones, right? So a company is always going to be valued higher if it's showing a growth path. And growth in earnings or profits is way more important than growth in revenue, just as a fact. Okay. Next big category, processes and accounting. I've kind of hinted at this. Get your books in order, understand your metrics, what drives your business, and document your processes. Also, start to think about your tax planning. There are certain ways you can structure a business so that it can be very tax advantaged when you sell it. But many of those plans take years to be classified as okay, right? The IRS has look back periods where they say, hey, this needed to be in place for 5 years before you get this advantage. So that's why it's tough if you say, hey, I want to sell this in 6 months and I don't want to pay any tax. That's going to be a tougher go, right? So there are things you need to start doing well in advance of when you want to sell. All right. And the last category is really about helping you get that independence, and that is focusing on management. So get independent from your business. I understand that I'm not talking to, a lot of your listeners don't have 50 employees and things, but even if you only have 10, you need to figure out who can start to, level up and take on some of the responsibilities that you're currently doing, right? Building management capability within your organization is incredibly important. And again, this has double benefit. It comes back to not only the future value, but it makes your business much more fun and profitable to run short term. And
Yeah.
then finally is a lot of business owners, rightly so, run a lot of personal expenses through their business. Um, those when it comes time to value them, those will get added back. So that they'll be, but it's a bit of a yellow flag if this looks like, you've been putting your yacht through the business. It just, buyers will say, what else, right? What else is going on here? So kind of removing those personal expenses from the company, always a good thing to do. So those are all things, some of which are very specific, but most are, this just makes your company better, regardless of what your timeline is.
Wow, this is wonderful. There's so much here, and I'm so glad we had a chance to have this conversation. I mean, we could go, into a lot of those things. I heard so many things in there. Where we come in, would be, like for the owner that's what next doesn't have it figured out. We can help them with that kind of thing. There's oftentimes in a generational business, each generation has their own point of view, and the founding generation may be a little afraid of leaving, afraid of retiring or leaving the business, partly out of who am I if I'm not that? Right? And so that's that personal side, but it affects the business because all of those things about, documented processes and developing leadership, if it's just easier to do it myself than to train somebody, then that can go on for years. But if I never train somebody to replace me, then I also can't leave. And
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It is a big challenge of the business is me, I am the business, right? And this is something that business owners struggle with, right? And I use somewhat silly examples, but I say, if you've been the one that's been making the donation for the float in the parade, or you've been buying the hockey team jerseys for 20 years and they have your name on them, that's hard to get rid of, right? It's
yes,
hard to leave because you are a part of the community, right?
those are
I
great
get that.
examples, actually.
Yeah, I get that. But what I say to business owners who are struggling with that is, if you don't have a plan and your business goes completely away, think of the impact that has, not just on you, right? If something happens to you, it's your family, your employees, your vendors, your customers, and your community. So it really is, you've got to get past the thing that I am the business and the business is me, because that's not true. It's bigger than that. I can tell it's a true story. It's a horrible story. I hope this never happens to anybody, but it's a friend of mine. His father was a lawyer, successful lawyer, um, for 15 years, had his own practice, didn't document anything. His bookkeeper was not the greatest, and he ended up getting sick and dying. And you'd say, gee, there's probably some value in a law firm, with the clients and cases and things like that. There were no processes. The family didn't have passwords, didn't have access to anything. They had to pay over $70,000 just to forensic accountants, just to figure out what was going on, who owed the firm money, who the firm owed money, all those kinds of things. And so what should have been an asset was worthless, and worse than worthless, cost them $70,000 just to clean up. So sounds like an extreme example, but that's what can happen if you haven't written any of this stuff down. So sobering, sobering. I hope it never happens again. But it's also then, look at the impact on the community, right? He had clients, and that all just went away because he could have had a plan of, hey, something happens. This is who you talk to. Didn't have that.
Excellent reason, exactly, sobering reason for
Yeah.
thinking ahead, even when it doesn't seem like it's impending. It is because of the amount of time that things take.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for this perspective. I'm looking forward to sharing this, and people can find you at greaterheightscoaching.com.
Yes.
Right?